Hello mate, and welcome to a exciting Unity tutorial video that is well, it's going to make this the thing that you can see on the screen. I'll quickly run a demo, hit the play button, and quick as a flash you can see we've got these buttons. I can add 100, I can add 10, I can reduce it back to 0, I can even hit the button to reduce to 0 like that. We're going to do that, and I'm going to explain to you how we plumb this thing in, or how we use the value of this thing somewhere else. Okay, so you can see I've already got a bunch of stuff going on here, so I am going to delete all that stuff and we'll start from scratch. Okay, so as you can see I have a scene set up, and all I've got is a canvas here, and I've called it awesome canvas. Yeah, but you can call it whatever you want. It's just a canvas. You right click, and then where it says UI, you just click canvas, and then it will create both a canvas and it will add an event system to your scene. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle the two scripts that we need to write for this. They're very, very simple scripts, and I will explain what they do as we code them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go into our scripts folder, which we have obviously created, and then inside my scripts folder I've got a scriptable objects folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new script by going create and then scripting and then scriptable object script. I'm going to call it integer value like that. Now, if you're not using the latest version of Unity, you may not have the option to automatically create a scriptable object. You may have to just create a empty C# script and then actually write the code that we need. So let's jump into the code for that file. Just double click on it and it'll pop open like this. Now the first thing I want to do is get rid of where it says scriptable objects here, and I'm going to change that so that it says values. Okay, so this basically just tells Unity what to call the file when I right click and I want to create one of these scriptable objects in my assets folder. Now those of you who don't know, a scriptable object is a box. Okay, that's all it is. It's a box. It contains data. You can simply use variables inside your code files if you want to. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way, but this way creates a, I want to say, physical representation of the data that's contained within it. In our assets folder, every time we reload the game, that asset will be created with the default value, and then we can tweak it during runtime, and then every time we reload the game or reload the scene, it will revert back to its original value, which may not feel like it's that useful, but in this instance it's very useful for what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so we've got public class integer value scriptable object, nice and simple. So all we have to do in here is create a public integer, and we have to spell public correctly, not public or public integer, and we're just going to call it value. Okay, dead easy, and that's it. It could be that simple if you wanted it to be, but we're going to add a couple of helper methods in there, helper functions in there, that are going to make life a bit easier further down the line. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a public void. Now, if you're completely new to C# or Unity, some of these things are going to seem like, what the hell? So public means that I can access the value or the method or the function from outside this script, from outside this class. So if I was to just call it a void function, the only place I would be able to invoke that function, the only place I'd be able to say do this bit of code, is from inside this class, integer value class, i.e. in this file, basically. But I want to be able to call this from other places. I want to be able to say, hey, you there, you integer value, do this block of code within yourself for whatever reason. Okay, so we set it to public. Void means that we're not expecting integer value to give us anything back. So when I say do this, I don't need feedback. I don't want the integer value thing to say anything back to me. Okay, I just want to say you go and do that, and then off it goes and does it. Okay, so public void, and then we're going to say reset. Okay, and the reset method or function, all I want it to do is set it back to 0 in this case. Okay, let's say the default for an integer value is 0. So what I will do is I will say value equals 0, job done. Now, I do also want the ability to set the number. We could, in this case, just say whatever the name of the value is that we give it, we could say dot value equals, but that's not very good coding practice. Realistically, this should actually be private. So for example, we would actually be saying it's got the value of integer, and we would have to do a serialized field for it so that we can actually set it in the inspector. But realistically, you shouldn't be able to access this value directly from outside. We should have to go through a getter method. So for example, if I wanted to do that here, I just go public int value, and then all I want that to do is return value. Okay. Now this itself, this way I've done it here is a little bit sketchy anyway, because you can actually still set the thing. So what we should actually do is say return value like that, and like that. But because it's an actual method now, we're saying that we need these brackets. Another way we could do it is we could actually say public int value get return value and have no set method. So what we're doing here, in amongst all of this faffery, is we're saying that if somebody calls for the value with a capital V, it will return whatever the small v value is, but it means that we don't have the ability to set this value from outside of the file. So in order to do that, we need to give it a set method or a set function. So we'll say public void set int value. Look at that, the code already knows what I want to do, and it already knows what I want to do there as well. Very clever, very clever. Okay, so now what we're saying is this value, i.e. the value associated with this class, is going to be equal to whatever the value is that we put in. Now I could change that, I could call it amount or number or whatever to make it less confusing, but whatever. Okay, so now we've got a means of getting the value with a capital V, we've got a means of setting the value, and we've got a means of resetting it. And we could actually just add an add method to this as well. So we'll say public void add, and then integer value there. And all we're going to do inside this function is this value plus equals value. Nice and easy. So now we can add the parameter that's passed to the total, like so. And I'm wondering, shall I add? Yeah, I'm going to add another property in here. This one is going to be public, and it's going to be can be negative, and it's going to be a boolean. So we need to say public bool can be negative, and default is going to be false. Okay, now the reason I'm adding that now is that if we were to add a negative number to this, which is entirely possible, if it can be negative and it goes negative, not a problem. But I want to be able to say that this value cannot be negative, because it gives us a little bit of a safety buffer further down the line. For example, if we're talking about the amount of money in a business's bank account, you don't necessarily want that to be able to go zero. You know, some businesses do have you know, overdrafts and things like that, but generally speaking, if you're coding a game where the player has money, you don't want them to be able to go into negative money. So we're saying this value, this dot value plus equals value, and then what we want to say is if this dot value is less than 0, this dot value equals 0. So we're actually clamping it. We're not saying, giving anything back to the user to say you can't do that. We're just saying if it tries to go below 0, it'll just go to 0. That just makes life a little bit more simple for us. Okay, so that is that code file done. So we will jump back into Unity. hydration. And after that seamless transition, we'll jump back into our scripts folder, and we need to create another script. We're going to go create scripting. This time it's going to be a mono behavior script, and we're going to call it a value changer, like so. To open up that file, nice empty file, jobs are good. Now for this file, we don't need an update and a start method. We're going to get rid of all that stuff. The only thing we need is the name of the class and the using Unity engine statement at the top, but that's going to change in a minute, but it'll do it automatically. So first thing I want to do is I want to add a public text mesh pro UGUI, and I'm going to call it value text. And for default, again, I'm going to set that to 0. You can set it to whatever you want. In fact, no, that's entirely the wrong thing. I'm being an idiot. We've got just that. Next thing we need to add is a couple of methods for the adding and changing of the values. Okay, so we need to do an add method just like we did before. Public add, and we need to set that a void, otherwise it's going to throw a hissy fit. Public void add. There we go. Okay, and again, we're going to take in an integer and we're going to call it value. And in order for us to be able to change the value, we also need a reference to the value. So we're going to say public integer value, and we'll just call it value. Like so. Integer value, boom. Now all we're going to say is value.add. Oh yeah, we need to say this.value, sorry, because we're referencing the integer value, and then we're calling the add method within it, and we're just saying add that value to it. Job done. Now, something I didn't add to the integer value thing, which I'm going to do now, is we need to add a public string method, and we're going to call it toString. Now it's going to not like that very much, because we actually need to say it's an override, because every object in Unity or in C# automatically has a toString method, which we want to override. And when we say, well, what we're going to return from this is value.toString. Because if we was to say toString of the integer value object, we might get a hash version of it, which will be a load of gobbledygook. We need to actually say, if we ask for this object's toString method, we actually want the text representation of the value. Okay, so that's what we've got. Okay, so now we're saying add there. We can also say reset, so public void reset, and we will just say this dot value dot reset. Again, we're just using the methods that we've already written inside the code. In fact, we don't actually need to use the this statement for that, because we're not passing in a property. So we're saying add, and we're saying reset. Now we also need to update, because we've got a reference to our Text Mesh Pro object here, but at the moment we're not setting it. So what we need to do is say public void update text, or update value, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it update value text, and then all we're going to do is say value text dot text is equal to value dot toString. Okay, so the codes, this is all fairly standard code, as you can see by the fact that Visual Studio is able to predict what I'm trying to get it to do before I even finish the line. So we know that we're saying the text property of this Text Mesh Pro UGUI object, we want to set it to whatever this thing's toString method is outputting. And we can save that code now, and we can jump back into Unity, give it a moment to compile if it needs to. It doesn't appear like it needs to right here. And the next thing we need to do is create a folder in our assets folder called scriptable objects. And I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to create. And now you remember where I changed the text at the top of the scriptable objects file to say values. That's where this menu comes from. And as you can see, integer value actually exists in there. I can create one. So I'm going to call this something arbitrary like babies eaten. And in the right hand side, you can see that this scriptable object has a value that we can change, and it also has the boolean, the tick box for the boolean we created called can be negative. So I can set this value here in the inspector to be what the default value of this object is. In this case, I'm quite happy to leave it as 0, but you can set it to whatever you want it to be. Key thing to remember here is that whatever you set the number to be in the inspector will be the number that it always defaults to when you reload the game. It will change as you play around in the inspector. Like when we start creating the buttons to edit the value, you'll see the value change, but that is the real-time version of the object. It will still revert back to whatever we set the default to be when we reload the editor later on, okay? So in our awesome canvas, first thing we need to do is we need to create some buttons, but we're going to do that inside an empty. So I'm going to right click and hit create empty, and I'm just going to call this value changer. This just helps us keep everything modular, and it also helps us turn this into a prefab a bit further down the line. Okay, so inside this value changer thing, I'm going to add a bunch of buttons, but what I'm going to do before that is I'm actually going to add the value changer script to this object. So I'm just dragging my value changer scripts over here, and you can see that currently it wants a value text and a value. We've already got the value in our scriptable objects folder, so I can drag over my babies eaten into there, and that's now created that connection. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a text object, a text mesh pro UGUI object. So UI text mesh pro, and then I'll change the name of this to be value text like so. I'm going to set the text to be aligned both in the center and both horizontally and vertically. I'm going to make sure that my height is set to 30 and my position should be 0. Okay, I'm also going to set the width to be maybe like 60 and change the value of the text to be 0. Okay, you can use things like layout groups and stuff to make this spread out, the size of the object change depending on how big the number is. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're not going to faff around with that. The next thing we're going to add is actually we're going to go back to our value changer, and where it's saying none text mesh pro UGUI, we're now going to drag that text object we just created there. So now our value changer script has got both of its references. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a button. So we're going to say UI again, button text mesh pro, and I'm going to set the width to be 60. I'm going to change the color of the text in a moment. I'm going to change the color of the button itself to be green, because this is going to be one of our add buttons. I'm going to rename the button itself to be +10. And then I'm going to change the value of the text inside to also be +10, and change the color of the text to be white, like so. So this is the first of our buttons, okay? Now, in order for us to get this button to do stuff, first thing I need to do is change the Y position to 30 so that it's not overlapping the value text. And then down here in the button component, you can see that there is an on-click section. And it currently says list is empty. If I add the plus button in there, now it's got room for me to drag something. So if I drag the value changer, the actual game object, into there, you can see that it now sees that object. And then under no function, we drop that menu down, you can see value changer, and now I can see the add method there. Select the add method, and I'm just going to change that value to be 10. Nice and simple. Now if I was to run this script right now, give it a second to compile, that button now adds 10 to that value, but it's not doing anything, and I'll explain why in a moment. I want to just get the buttons in place first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my +10 button. I'm going to set Control and D. I'm going to change this one to +100. I'm going to change the position to 60. And I also need to change the value of the text. So we select the text object, as a child to it, and we set that to +100. And then selecting the button again, where we've got the 10 in the on click, we now change that to 100. We've now got a +100 and a +10. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to select the baby's eaten value here. And as you can see, it now currently says 60. And that's because I hit the +10 button multiple times. So it's actually set the value in the inspector there, but that is not the value that will be there when I reload the game. When I reload the game, it will back to 0 again because that's the default that I've set. Okay. And we haven't actually plugged in our update text method into our methods in order to update. So let's do that now. We jump back into our code file and under value changer, where we've got this update text method, I'm going to copy the name of that, and we're just going to stick it after each one of our two methods here. So now if I were to do the same thing again, Unity will take a moment to compile. Now if I hit the play button again, you'll notice that the text will immediately change or after I've clicked a button. So there we go. Now you can see it's gone to 70 and I keep adding, and we do have a problem with wrapping and we can sort that out in a second. But there we go. So if I were to go to here, you can see that at the moment, if we have text wrapping mode normal, if we just say no wrap, then it will stop it from wrapping down into multiple lines. It will just expand horizontally now, regardless of what the size of the value is. So now we're going to put the negative buttons in. So I'm going to grab my +10 button. I'll get Control and D again. We'll duplicate that. Come back to the top and we'll change this to -10. We need to actually set its position to -30 now. And I'm also going to change the color to be kind of red. There we go. We also need to change the value of the text in it to say -10. And when we come back to our button, we need to change this now to -10 as well. For the purposes of simplicity, I'm going to drag these into the order that they appear on the screen. And now I'm going to duplicate that -10 button, change its name to -100, change the value of the text to be -100. And then on the button click element, I'm going to change that to also be -100. And we need to change its Y position to -60, like so. And for some reason, the text didn't update to -100. There we go, it's done it now. Excellent. Okay, so we've got the thing on the screen. We also have the objects in the hierarchy in the order that they appear on the screen, just to make it a little bit less confusing. And if we were to create another button, let's just take our +10 button here, duplicate it, set its position to 0, set the color to, I don't know, orange, let's just say, like so. And then on the text element, I'm going to set that to 0. And I'm going to change its overflow mode to no wrap, just like we did with our previous text. And I'm actually going to delete the value text that we created. Okay, and I'm actually going to, on my value changer game object, I'm going to select the text from inside that button, and I'm going to drag that to be the text that gets updated by our code. So now if I save that by hitting Control and S, always save to make sure you never know, you might have accidentally put a character in the script or something, causes the world to crash, and then it just makes life a little bit less frustrating. Okay, so now if I hit the reset button, nothing happens. It's still trying to add 10 because we haven't actually changed what that button does. So we need to come here. First thing we need to do is change this to read reset button. So let's get rid of that capital U because otherwise that will bug me, like so. And then here we're going to change the method that we're calling, and we're going to call the reset method instead, like that. Now if we hit the play button, if we watch the value of babies eaten, it's currently 440, and when I hit this button, it resets it to 0. So we can now add, keep that selected, we can add, I'm selecting things in the wrong window. If we hit add there, you can see it's going up by 100, going down by 10, going down by 100. Because I don't have can be negative selected, it can't go below 0, so it stops at 0. The only thing that we need to change now, or that we could change if we wanted to, is that when we start the game, if we hit play, it doesn't reflect what the value currently is. It waits for us to hit button first. So if we come into our value changer, what we can do is we can reintroduce our start method, and we can just call update value in the start method. Give it a moment to compile. And now if I change this to something like 55, let's just say for argument's sake, when I hit play, it will immediately update that button to contain the value that it's supposed to contain. So there you go. So the last thing we need to do is come into our prefabs folder, which I created earlier, and we can just drag our value changer game object into that. And now we've got it saved as a prefab. So anytime I want to add another one of these to my game, I can just do this and I can drag it to wherever I want to drag it. Let's just grab it and go like, oh no, let's grab both of them. We can just change the X position of that whole object over there. And then all I need to do if I want to change a different value is just create another scriptable object, integer value or float or whatever. And then I can just select that in this value changer script component on that game object. It's really that simple, guys. It took us about half an hour to get there because I'm trying to explain all the nuts and bolts and stuff. But basically, now we've got this scriptable object value here, baby's eaten. I can create other scripts that can access that value just the same way that the value changer object itself does. And so we can set it in on the value changer, and then we can say another script, right, what is the value that the player has chosen for that there, like that. You see, it keeps things nice and modular, and it saves you having to reference each script. Referencing each other can get very messy. If you can make it more modular like this using scriptable objects, it makes life a hell of a lot easier. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that and didn't enjoy the bicep flexes through the video too much. I'll see you in the next one, but until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, all right? Bye-bye.